Another Kalicube Tuesdays. Today it's with Kevin Indig, who's a delightful chap who lives, where do you live, Kevin?
Chicago now.
Whoa, oh, the Windy City. Oh,
Yes.
I always wanted to go to Chicago. Can I come and see you at some point?
Absolutely. We'll have deep dish pizza. It's delicious.
Yeah, I want to sleep in the hotel that the Blues Brothers slept in the Blues Brothers film, with the train going by and they have to hold the windows. Anyway, my references is all to do with the Blues Brothers and pizza. A quick hello and we're good to go. Welcome to the show, Kevin Indig.
Oh, I love it. Thank you, man. I hope we recorded that.
I do, yeah. It's all recorded. I sing that song for everybody, and it's genius lyrics, because all I have to do is change the name at the end.
It works, though. It works. Very charming. Jason, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely delightful. I've spoken to you a few times, known you for quite a long time. You once talked to one of my clients about me and said nice things, which I appreciate greatly. And I've never actually been on a show properly with you, so it's absolutely delightful because I know you're incredibly intelligent.
Oh, likewise. Jason, thanks so much, man. Again, you're super charming, and I only say things, good things about people who deserve it. So that's on you.
Should we just keep charming each other?
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah. Let's do that. Shit's good.
Right, we're going to start off with the brand SERP, because your brand SERP's really cool. If we show that first slide, I was looking you up in America, and we've got this, and it's the new kind of knowledge panel with the two-part split across both sides, which I absolutely love, and I now really don't like looking at the other one, which we'll see in a minute. But a few things here. Number one, you've got lots of photos at the top, and you're on my knowledge panel, and I'm on your knowledge panel.
And we both share. Made me proudest of the whole brand SERP here. That was like, I'm like, this company is all you can ask for.
Right. Yeah. Well, we both share Rand Fishkin and Cindy Crum, as it were. So I think there's some kind of close connection, but there isn't actually a connection between us, which is curious from Google. The other thing I saw is your About page has got a square video thumbnail.
That's right.
In desktop.
Yeah, it's a presentation that I gave a long time ago. But what's funny is that, there's this like black and red thread going through the whole brand SERP.
Yeah.
It's more by accident, but yeah, I seem to wear the same shirt a bit too often, I guess.
Yeah, no, I thought it was on purpose, the black and red thing, because you're wearing black today. But if we now look at the Australian one, there you go. And we've got the old style knowledge panel. Doesn't that just look kind of like boring and dull all of a sudden?
It does. It looks so 2018.
But actually, if you look over on the left-hand side, it's presenting the About page as a kind of site link indented and without the video thumbnail.
That's right. Yeah, not as pretty.
So, yeah. I mean, from my perspective, it's a great brand SERP, but I also wanted to point out that it's very different because of the design, in fact, of Google, rather than the results from Australia to America. I think people fail to realize that these things do change a lot across different continents, but just different countries as well. So that's it for the brand SERPs today. We're now going to move on to split testing SEO experiments, and I purposefully didn't learn anything about it so that you can teach me what I need to know about split test SEO experiments. So can we start off, what do you mean?
I love it. Yes, absolutely. So generally, split testing, I think a lot of people are familiar with user testing, right? Where you split a user group into a control group and a variant group. You make the change to the version that is exposed to the variant group, and then compare the reaction basically to the control group. That's like the very high level. That's really what we're talking about. And there's a lot of nuance in there. And there's also a bit of a nuance when it comes to SEO testing specifically. So generally, just to set the stage a little bit, I think, to be a bit bold here, I think that if you don't do SEO testing these days, your chances of succeeding are very, very low. And the reason I say that is because, for once, SEO has become really competitive in my mind, especially in certain verticals. There are brands with $1 million budgets, with huge SEO teams, with great knowledge. And it's really hard to compete if you don't adopt a testing mindset. Number two is that the Google ranking algorithm, or what we consider the Google ranking algorithm, has become so complex that there's not probably not a single person to really understand all of it. It's almost like the tax system.
But isn't it also with machine learning that things have moved so far away from even the humans at Google that even the people at Google don't really understand? They're saying basically we've got this big package. You need to please the package. The package is aiming there, and so you need to aim where the package is going. I don't know why I'm calling it a package. It's an algorithm.
Package is fine, but you're absolutely on point here, Jason. And the thing is also that this package changes over time, right? It's not just, hey, this is where you have to aim for. It's like, this is where you have to aim for now, and next month it could be slightly different. And not these 180 changes, but there's a constant process of evolution and adoption going on. Funny anecdote. So I'm Jewish, and currently there are lots of Jewish holidays. And so a week ago, I was at this Jewish event here in Chicago at the beach. And it was like a completely new group of people, and I got in touch with some of them. And so, of course, turns out that one of these people is a Google engineer, and she works on the core algorithm. And you know how many secrets I learned about that? Exactly 0, because there's not a single person that knows everything. There are dedicated teams that just work on all the recipe SERPs or all the SERPs related to a specific vertical. And so it's very fragmented. Of course, there are some teams that bring it closer together. There is a very shielded team in Mountain View. But go ahead.
But that means that if you're in the recipe space, the team working on the kind of specific tweaking of the recipe algorithm in the Blue Link algorithm, the core algorithm, is going to be slightly different to the shoe vertical, because they've got a team working on the shoe vertical, whatever it might be. So yeah, we're all deeply, when we generalize, we're really barking up the wrong tree.
Right. Absolutely. That's what it comes down to, right? And that's why testing is so important, right? Things in your vertical might be slightly different. Even, a long time ago, I was working at Search Metrics, and back then they still did these ranking factor studies. And one of the outcomes was that the travel vertical is very different than, say, the retail vertical or the finance vertical, even when it comes to ranking signals. So you have to test to find out what works for you, and you have to test because the algorithm constantly changes.
Right. And talking about verticals, one thing with Kalicube that I've been doing is diving down into entities on a geo entity type and vertical industry level. And it is stunning. What I do is pull up the dominating blue links, the dominating social channels, the dominating news, the dominating video, dominating trusted sources for the knowledge graph. And it differs enormously between industries, entity type, and geo. It's stunning. Sorry, I've just gone off on a rant.
No, it is stunning. It is absolutely stunning. I think the brand SERP you showed earlier is a good example of that. But yeah, entity, knowledge graph. I mean, all these things they're not the same globally and by vertical, as you said. And so
right. But and that's the point you were making. Let's come back to that. Is that because it varies so much across industries, because it varies so much also in terms of the types of results that will appear. If you're not split testing, you're shooting in the dark.
You shoot it in the dark, absolutely. You have this old mindset, which I call the blueprint SEO mindset. And I grew up in that world. There was a catalog of things and how they should be. And you go to a site and you see, is that the case or not? Okay, then we got to change things, right? Today, not that easy anymore. We have a map, a high-level map of what is important. We know content, titles, backlinks, all these kind of things. But to go a level deeper, we need to test what works. And so there are different types of tests.
Before we go on that, just one point, there are some fundamentals that never change, like being crawlable and being indexable. You've got your basics. Once you've got your foundations, just to make sure nobody goes off and starts split testing, indexing, and crawling. And then you can start building the split testing, which is where we come in.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's some the 4 steps basically of the ranking process in my mind, right? As you mentioned, there's the indexing part or the crawling part, rendering, indexing, and then ranking, right? And the first 3 steps, they basically don't change. There's information retrieval. We're just talking about the ranking part of the process. Good call out, Jason. And so when it comes to,
we just keep being charming to each other for another half an hour. We're doing a very good job.
I just appreciate each other so much. But there's basically 3 types of testing in my mind, right? And so we call this episode split testing. That is the most common one, and is most applicable when it comes to aggregator sites. An aggregator is basically a site like a marketplace or an e-commerce store where you have a lot of pages with the same template. eBay is a great example. Amazon, of course, is e-commerce players, but then also sites like Facebook or LinkedIn, right? They have a profile page, they have a company page, maybe a couple of others, but basically they have like an overseeable amount of page templates that all have the same elements and components. And that makes it very testable because it's very simple to take a large number of pages with the same template, split them into two or several groups, and then make changes and measure the impact. Very basic, very easy.
Oh, sorry, I have a statement to make just really quickly. There's a webinar tomorrow about indexing and crawling with Dawn Anderson and Fabrice Canel on Duda tomorrow. Sign up for that. Second point was, by doing that split testing, if you take a profile page, Fabrice Canel from Bing was saying it really relies on sites having this templated system where it can rely on the way the page is built in each of these different templates. So it will go all the way through LinkedIn and expect to see the same template all the time. If you're split testing, aren't you throwing it a big curveball?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to get to the counterpart in just a second. But yes, no, you're good. And by the way, Dawn and Fabrice on a webinar, it sounds pretty tempting. But yeah, I mean, it's really this kind of templatization that makes things easier to test. And we have a high degree of that on the web, in part because of CMSs, like WordPress or maybe like a Shopify. But anyway, long story short, much easier to test. They're very straightforward. The counterpart of aggregators are integrators, and those are usually sites that rely heavily on content, SaaS sites, maybe publishers, and that's where every page pretty much looks different, right? The content is very different. You don't have a product catalog, you don't have the same elements, you have a variety, and that demands a fundamentally different type of testing. And that's where we often speak about before and after testing, where basically you make a change and then you just see, does traffic go up or down? Does click-through rate go up or down? Clicks, impressions, those kind of things. And those are valuable, but we often disregard that we can also do a form of split testing on non-templatized pages. And this is, if there's one more controversial statement that you would want to take away from our conversation, I think it would be is that these before and after tests are actually not very valuable. And instead, you want to adopt a split testing mindset, even when it comes to non-templatized pages.
Right, but if it's non-templated, it's an enormous amount of work to go through to actually split test, because you need to apply them on a one-by-one basis or be incredibly smart with your regex in your database.
That's right. And so here's what you want to do about this. So first of all, you can still look for control groups, even if not all pages are templatized. It is more work, and best case, you have some sort of telemetry or tool that helps you do that. But even manually, you can just see, okay, which pages have the same traffic patterns over a long span of time. Right? We're going to get into testing, into test design in just a moment and what factors are important. But just know that you can still pick control groups even if pages don't have the exact same template.
Right. Okay. And right, in that case, how many pages, if you're doing that, do you need to actually take into account? I mean, I would just say 2 or 3, let's see what happens, but you're not going to accept that, are you?
I might actually, I think it depends much more on the amount of traffic, right? So here's the thing, right? If what matters much more than the number of control pages,
right,
is, are they following the same traffic patterns? 1, and 2, is there a significant amount of traffic, right? So if you have a page that ranks for 2 or 3 keywords on position 5, the noise is going to be so high, you're not going to get anything meaningful out of it. So we're talking about pages that get at least 100 visits a day, or have at least a somewhat steady traffic pattern over time. Now, the kicker of where 90% of people fail when it comes to SEO testing is to revert the change that they made. What happens most of the time is that you make a change on a page, say you add the current year to the meta title. You roll that out on the page, you see, oh, the page gains more traffic over time. Awesome, successful test. But it's not true. That is not a successful test. It is only successful if you revert the change, you take the year out of the title again, and then you see the traffic coming back down to baseline. Then you know it has an actual impact, and then you can also understand the incremental value of adding the year and title.
Oh, right. You just made me think of something else as well. But right, that point is saying we've got this, it goes up here, and then it goes back down, or it goes down, and then it goes back up. And if you haven't done that, you don't actually know. I mean, wouldn't most people, I mean, as you say, they just go, yeah, it's gone up, so that's happy, and we'll move everything over to that. And you're saying that that's a foolish mistake that we shouldn't make, that I probably would have made if you hadn't told me.
Well, it's, it's tempting. It's also very painful to revert the change, right? Because, hey, now I got all this traffic. Why should I shoot myself in the foot? But if you want to really determine the impact, you have to do it. And why do you have to do it? Because SEO does not deal with laboratory conditions, right? We cannot isolate single factor and say it's 100% that. We can only say there is a very likely chance it is that single factor that moved the needle. And by reverting the change, we increase the robustness of the test or the statistical significance. Now, just as an aside, for all the statistics fans who are tuning in right now, every SEO test is a quasi experiment. It's not the super rigid statisticians here in the audience. They'll probably say, it's not real SEO, it's not real split testing. And yeah, it's quasi testing. It's still valuable. Everybody should do it. But the thing to take away here is to revert the change, to really understand the incrementality of the change.
Right, because I actually did statistics at university alongside economics. You wouldn't believe it when you hear me talking, but one of the things is statistical reliability, or whatever it's called, I can't remember anymore, it's 30 years ago, comes after 7,000 of anything. Under 7,000, I seem to remember that as a number that my teachers were throwing at me, is basically saying, if you've got 7,000 and something, you can probably rely on the fact the result is statistically relevant. That was the word. Have you ever heard the number of 7,000?
In different contexts, yes. And to be fair, I think, if you want to run SEO experiments on a large site and you actually have a data scientist who has a degree in math or statistics, there's a lot of depth to go down to, and a lot of things that they can help you with. So yeah, like the number 7,000, or just this idea of 95% or 98% statistical significance, there are ways to get there. And in best case, you have somebody to help you with that.
Yeah, no, the 95 percentile thingy, whatever that's called it is called the 95th percentile, is you chop off the top 5 and the bottom 5 because they're outliers, and you take that middle 90%, and that's going to be more reliable. Is that something you guys do?
Yes, yeah. We have I'm blessed with a fantastic data science team who helps me with it, and we've built some tooling around that as well. But there are also some third-party tools that you can rely on to help you finding, the right control groups, finding or basically helping you set up a robust test design. Now, this is, I think it's important to understand, and this is one of the messages that I have for everybody out there, is that you can take it to that level of depth. But you should not think that either you go there or your tests don't make sense. Everybody should test no matter what.
Thank you, Anton, for the graph.
Yes, here we go.
So that was the 95th percentile, and Anton's just put it up on screen for people listening to the audio podcast. Carry on, Kevin. I'm sorry.
No problem. You want to test no matter what, even if your test isn't statistically perfect. It's better than no testing. What Anton showed, and thanks for tuning that in here because it's super helpful, is the so-called p-value. And the p-value basically just tells you, hey, you have two hypotheses, right? You have this, what we call the null hypothesis, which is basically the current state. And then you have a new hypothesis. And the p-value tells you how confident you are that the null hypothesis, or the way that it's currently set up, is not better. Right, so we're talking, it's getting a bit more complicated, but just know that high p-value generally not a bad thing.
Right. Okay. And if we come back to the idea of do it yourself, like people who don't have a team like yours. Thank you, Brian. Great chat so far, guys. So far, guys, from Brian Mosley. Thank you very much. I know you know a lot about it because you've got a tool that does this kind of thing at SEMrush. Now, we were talking about smaller things. I mean, I'd say clients of SEMrush would probably be using SEMrush for that. I don't really know, but as a do-it-yourself thing where you think, well, I'll just pick my highest traffic pages, divide them into 2 with about the same amount of traffic, split test 1, and then look at Search Console to see what the results were. Would that be a fair way of going about it, or is that too haphazard and sticky tape and sellotape and string?
I think it's a great start, Jason. You know, if you just do that, you already have a leg up, right? That's what most people don't even start doing. And you know, I think now when we speak about test design, there are a couple of things to look after before we even go into what you can test, right? When it comes to good test design, we talked about a high traffic page or high traffic pages in general. Number two is there's the duration of the test, and there are two ways to come at the duration. There is an actual math you can put behind this based on how much traffic you get and how impactful you think the change you want to make will be. So more impactful changes, say in our case, the meta title, might not have to run as long on a high traffic page as something very subtle, like maybe a small internal linking module, or maybe a small change to the body copy, which takes a while to pick up and for the changes to really become visible. You know, there's this phenomena in statistics, which is the reversion to the mean. What it basically means is that when you start testing, in the beginning, you see a lot of volatility, and that volatility over time calms down and it reverts to the mean, which is the real impact that you want to determine, or the real change, right? And so when you have highly impactful things that you want to test, like a meta title, it reverts to the mean relatively quickly. If you have a more subtle factor that you want to test, it will take a longer time. So generally, I think the best duration is at least 3 to 4 weeks. Anything under that typically is very tough to become clear as an experiment. But there's also an approach where you can calculate the exact number of days that it takes to run an actual statistical test.
Right. And in that 3 weeks, do you take into account the time for Google to crawl, re-index, and reevaluate?
That's such a good point, because that's also something that you want to make sure. Good test design means you look at the server log files and you make sure that Google has crawled both the control page and the variant page.
Because, I mean, I've been looking at the speed of indexing. Brian's asked a really complicated question. We can come back to that because I don't understand it. Let's say a year ago, I did a video, in fact, for SEMrush about the speed of indexing, and I could get a new page indexed in a couple of seconds, a minute. And I actually did it live, and within a minute, it was showing the new meta description. And that was really cool, but it's not like that anymore. I updated a meta title and meta description a few days ago. The meta title's been digested and used, the meta description hasn't. And it's been a few days, and kind of that's also a problem, as you say, well, I started the test today. Is it tomorrow? Even if it gets crawled, even if I've submitted it through Search Console and checked that Googlebot has been around, is it actually looking at the data? Is it actually updating it? And has it actually taken it into account? And the answer is you don't know.
Yes. There's a lot of these like subtle factors that can make experiments go sour. As you said, the crawl frequency, Google picking up the change. When we test things like internal linking at broader scale, that takes even longer, right? The more pages you test on, the longer it takes Google to crawl all of them. So all these things should go into test design. It also means that you need a certain amount of telemetry. You need to have that understanding. If you don't have access to your log files, it's getting more tricky out there, right? Again, shouldn't prevent you from testing, but yes, these are all things that you should, in best case, take into account and measure over time, right? So another interesting observation would be when you make a change to a variant group of URLs, does it impact Google crawl frequency? Does Google actually come back more often? And what does that say? You know, has the backlink profile changed to these pages over time, right? These are all factors that you want to kind of take into account as good as you can.
Yeah, I mean, we're just coming back to the thing is you're making this one change, but there's so many other factors that are coming into play that immediately you start saying, well, that doesn't really count, and or maybe it's not fully. But if you can keep it, if you can implement it, keep it going for several weeks or several months, depending on the subtlety of the change, as you said earlier on, revert, then you've got a strong split testing environment where you can actually start to think, I might not be sure, but I've certainly learned something and I've moved forwards in what I'm trying to do within my vertical. If we come back to that, within my specific vertical, which is going to be specific. And with Shopify, you must have gazillions of verticals. And that's my question. Are you split testing on your clients?
No, we're not split testing on our clients. We're testing all sorts of things. We have our own testing environments to some degree too, but no, we're not split testing our clients. But there's a lot of anecdotal stuff that we pick up, and at scale, there's some interesting patterns that emerge. But no, there would be.
Well, I mean, from my perspective, it comes back to what Russ Jeffrey was saying from Duda, is that they've got all these clients and they've got all this data, so they can actually say, here you go, the Core Web Vitals was his example, is the Core Web Vitals after all that noise didn't actually change anything.
Exactly. Yeah. That's absolutely. At this scale, you see a lot of interesting data and a lot of patterns, and but there's also a lot of noise, right? People like some merchants use different themes, right? They have a different level of SEO in-house and so on. So there is actually a lot of noise out there, but. Right. Yeah, but you can do quite a lot at that scale, right? Even if you have some of these larger sites. At G2, for example, we did a lot of testing, and that was a very templatized site, and it was feasible because we had a large number of pages in the index. So at a certain scale, no matter what type of business you are, whether you're a platform or a SaaS business or a marketplace, it gets really interesting.
Right. And basically, you've been doing this for years. You've been doing it on massive sites, so you really know what you're talking about. But Peter Mead asks a question about paid search, because it is really easy. You say, right, I'll do this split test. And now he's said that, I immediately think, yeah, it's so obvious. I have done it on paid traffic. Why did I never do it on SEO?
Yeah, Peter, a good. Thanks for asking the question. Good seeing you again. We met in Sydney a couple of years ago. Peter's a great lad, and it's funny because there are actually things that you can learn from paid split testing and then transfer them over to your organic strategy, right? Like title testing, for example, or the copy itself. That can have a true impact, and you can measure how people react to a page, right? Jason, as you and I both know, the actual experience on the page and how helpful it is in solving your problem matters more and more in SEO. And you can test that with paid traffic.
Yeah, sorry, no, I was agreeing. But in fact, in paid traffic, I like to do DSA. And DSA is dynamic search ads, which is basically Google ads running off the search algorithm. So if you're a great SEO, DSA is brilliant. And in fact, that's why I went, ooh, at one point, is that if you're running DSA campaigns off your SEO, you can change some things in DSA and then do split testing without having to get involved in your SEO. But you can also do the split test on the SEO and measure it in Google ads by pure numbers. How much money am I making? And that's just give me a great idea for a client, because we've got a brilliant DSA campaign, and that's something I will now be doing as of tomorrow morning.
I love it. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do with organic and paid results. This is whole own kind of conversation, and maybe do a follow-up at some point in time. But when it comes to just sheer testing, right, you can also test different different value propositions on organic versus paid on the same SERP, and see how that changes the game. But now I'm venturing off too far. Coming back to like good test design, right? We spoke about the duration. We spoke about the importance of having a lot of traffic on these pages, picking a good control group. There's also this idea of a cool down period. And so this is another thing that I learned, which when you run a test on a set of URLs, you revert the changes, you see, okay, this change brought a 5% increase in click, the incrementality. You want to give these URLs a couple of weeks, or at least 1 week of a cooldown period before you run another test on them, just simply to make sure that nothing else changes that you couldn't.
Right.
This is also something that I learned the hard way and that I forgot initially. And then of course, it should go without saying, but actually, in practicality is often overlooked. You don't want to run several tests on the same URLs. You want to make sure there's only one test running on a set of pages at the same time.
Right. Yeah. Sorry. When you said cool down period, I thought of an angry teenager. But in fact, you just mean that kind of Google needs time to settle down and digest and not be freaked out. I mean, I look at Google in that kind of terms, is you can throw a big change at it and it can digest it. But if you do that too often, it just freaks out and you will see this big dip. And I just kind of see it, the machine just going, I'm not sure anymore. And to be safe, I'll just get rid of it while I think about it and then bring it back. So I kind of tend to warn clients, be very careful about changing multiple things very quickly over time, because you're going to freak the machine out, because it is a little bit sensitive. And it does work on confidence a great deal. I think kind of we fail to realize there is this idea of confidence in an algorithm. And if it's confident, it will throw things forward and to the top. And if it's not, it will kind of go, well, if I'm not sure, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. All you have to do is look on page 4, 5, 6 on the Google search results for any given keyword, and you see the results that Google is very, very unconfident in promoting in any way. And it's like you find the craziest things, on these pages. But yes, you want to give it a cooldown period. You also want to see, is anything else changing unexpectedly? So if the test is over for say a week, and then all of a sudden there's like a major dip or spike in traffic, then you have to ask yourself, okay, what happened here? Is that unrelated to my test? Was there some sort of a lagging factor that played a role here, where maybe your test didn't run long enough? So cooldown period, incredibly helpful to make sure that your own confidence in the test results is incredibly high.
And how do you deal with stuff like kind of trending news that might kind of affect, or seasonality that might, obviously seasonality, you need to take that into account because you should know the seasonality for your own products in your own business and your own industry. But, trending news that you can't predict, that suddenly changes the scape. For example, more impressions that you didn't usually get, or a news box turning up at the top of the SERP, which suddenly changes the entire SERP.
Yeah, exactly. Or here, how Hans mentions, Google update middle of the test. All these things.
The most obvious one is the one I forgot.
But they all kill your test. It's dead. You can start from scratch, and especially during a core update or a larger Google update, right. You want to wait until things quote unquote cool down. Now, the exception is when you picked a control that was impacted the same way, then you're actually good. Right. Same accounts for seasonality. That's one of the reasons for why you want to pick a control to normalize for or equate for seasonality. But there are factors that can kill your test, like, again, some like a query all of a sudden deserving freshness and a news box showing up, or again, like a couple of very impactful backlinks going to one of the pages that you're testing. Like all these kind of things, they just kill your test, which leads to another important thing, and that is kind of the like retesting the same thing over. It's not the first thing that you want to do. I think when you just get started with SEO tests, you just want to like test a couple of things and get a bit of skin in the game and gain some experience. But over time, especially with things that you tested that seem to move the needle quite a lot, it is smart to test them again and repeat the same test to make sure that it still results in the same impact. And so you can, this is like, you do this with very high impact factors, but then also if there's a significant amount of time that has passed since the last time you tested this thing, you want to test it again because these factors change over time. And there is actually, like, it's very interesting, just in testing in general, there's this like crisis of repeatability where some of the biggest tests, for example, in psychology or economy, actually yield very different results when you test them again these days, which has led to a crisis in the scientific community. And long story short, you just want to be aware and conscious that you might want to retest some of the things over and over again, just to make sure that they still work the way that you think they work.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And it could just be a one-off, and you've got to be careful about that. Now, the question from Brian that he asked earlier on was, can you explain the difference between neural networks and Google Causal Impact for analyzing the results? Now, I don't even know what Google Causal Impact is, so I don't understand the question because I don't understand the most important word in it. Do you understand?
Yes, Google Causal Impact is actually pretty cool. It is an open source library for R, which you can use to run and evaluate tests that basically uses Bayesian testing or Bayesian time series for testing. So here's what this means, right? R, this really cool tool that you can use. You can also use Python, but R is very popular in the data science community for evaluating large data sets. And Causal Impact is an open source library for Google that allows you to run these Bayesian tests. And the idea of Bayesian testing is actually brilliant. I wrote an article on my blog about this a while ago, because you can run Bayesian tests, but you can also just adopt Bayesian thinking in itself. And so here's what this means. We spoke earlier about how some tests, like in the beginning, they might not be super reliable or super robust, but you're slowly iterating your way to the optimal solution over time by running several tests. And in best case, these tests are all connected with each other. And that's the idea of Bayesian testing. In fact, I think Bayes, like, lived a couple hundred years ago, is this guy who became super smart, not in his lifetime, like he became super smart after his death, like most people during that time. But he basically, what he did is, what he said is, okay, if I have an apple in my hand and I throw it over my shoulder without seeing where it should land, and I'm aiming to throw the apple in a bowl, the first time I throw it and it doesn't hit the bowl, I know where the bowl is not. So the more often I throw the apple over my shoulders, the better my understanding of where the bowl is not and what not to do, right? So you can iterate your way towards the optimal solution. You can do the same in SEO testing. And there's a simple but elegant method to it, where you say, okay, if I made, for example, a change to my title tag, and I see that the impact is 5%, then I can run another test within the same confines, within the title tag as well, that might be slightly related, but is different. And that initial test results can be the basis for the next test, right? So I can say, for example, hey, making a change to a title might result in a 10% increase in clicks. Now let's test something else in the title and use those 10% as the basis and see how that other test shakes out. And so you run 5 or 10 of these tests in a row, all of a sudden you have a really good understanding of title testing. And causal impact can help you get there in a technical way.
Right. But my only problem with that is that with 5 tests, with the cooling off period, well, the crawling period, the testing period, the reverting period, and the cooling off period, whatever you were calling it, you're looking at a year to do those 5 tests, more or less, by which time the algorithms have changed again.
Potentially, yes, absolutely. And that's why SEO testing never stops, right? It's a continuous process. And the best SEO teams in the world, in my mind, they have a high degree of testing because they are aware of that. But yeah, you're right. It takes a lot of time, takes a lot of effort. And I don't think most companies spend enough resources to go after it, because it is such a high effort.
Right. And would it be incredibly foolish if you've got a massive site to do 4 different split tests with one single baseline at one time? Or is that completely foolish?
No, it's not foolish. It will help you iterate over time, just get smarter about this. It's not technically Bayesian testing, right? But it doesn't matter. It's still interesting and still valid, because what if 2 of these tests turn out positive, 2 of those turn out negative, and you can pin it down back to what exactly you changed. Now all of a sudden you got smarter and you can run some follow-up tests. So yes, in essence, the more tests you can run simultaneously, the faster you can iterate, right? And this is the same thing in user testing. In fact, most startups measure as one indicator of growth and progress. They measure the test velocity. How many tests have we run in a certain amount of period, and can we increase it over time? So it is not foolish at all.
Brilliant. Wonderful. That's great. In fact, that also makes me now, the whole conversation, it's not, that wasn't the topic, but predictive SEO. I was talking to Rebecca Burbel from OnCrawl and Andrea Volpini from WordLift about predictive SEO at Brighton SEO. And there was so much noise and they were trying to explain it to me and I just couldn't get my head around it. But you indirectly have just made me incredibly keen to look into that, because from what I understand, it's saying this is what will happen if we don't do anything. Let's see what happens when we do something. And I'm suddenly incredibly interested. So Rebecca, if you do hear this, please come on the show. Thank you very much, Indig. Kevin, excuse me. That was absolutely delightful. And I'm just going to announce next week, which is Gennaro Cuafano from WordLift, strangely enough, who's going to be talking about looking at Google SERP as a product, and something I'm incredibly interested in. He analyzes financial statements from companies, much like Bill Slawski reads patents, and he tries to figure out from the business model what it is they're doing and where they're going. It's phenomenally interesting. And the idea that the SERP is actually Google's product, and that when they're creating these results, they're designing a product, which is something Nathan Chalmers from Bing told me. He's the whole page algorithm guy at Bing. Basically, his job is to design Bing's product, because they want, obviously it's where they're making their money from. So that's going to be phenomenally interesting. And I'm stunned by already what Gennaro shared in an email, and I won't share it with you because it will spoil the surprise, but it's going to be brilliant. Gennaro is delightful. Kevin, you were wonderful, charming, and you get the outro song. A quick goodbye to end the show. Thank you, Kevin.
Oh, thank you so much, Jason. That was brilliant. That was awesome. I had a great time here.
That was brilliant. Thank you. And thank you, everyone.